I'm delighted to say hello, everyone. My background screen isn't exactly like the real background at the moment, but the sun is shining, I'm happy to say. And welcome to this webinar, which is organised as part of International Women's Day and Neurodiversity Celebration Week. I'm Andrea McLeod, and I'm based at the Autism Centre for Education and Research, otherwise known as ACER, which is part of the Department of Disability Inclusion and Special Needs here at the University of Birmingham. So this is the second of two webinars that we're hosting. And our aim with these is to share with you some examples of innovations that can reduce barriers for autistic adults and young people. Before we get started, I just want to briefly explain some background to this. So in the field of autism, and especially in work with autistic adults and young people, as I know many of you will know, there's often fantastic work going on at a very small scale by practitioners and family members. It can be life-changing for the individuals concerned, but is not necessarily recognised more widely. Here at the university on our courses, our students are often practitioner researchers, which means that in their daily lives, they are practitioners, either in formal roles or informally as family members or carers. And naturally, they then use their studies with us to explore practice and build evidence, importantly, of what works in the real world. So in these webinars, we want to share this with you to give you examples of that work and its impact. And in particular, we want to share practical recommendations of how you might be able to take this away and use it in your own context. This webinar is going to focus on examples of how we might reduce barriers for autistic women, although we will consider some elements more widely, looking firstly at masking and then at access to maternity services. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are aware that some of what we're discussing might trigger memories of bad experiences. So I just want to remind you, the webinar is being recorded and it's going to be available later. So if you do need to take a break, please just do that. Don't worry, you will be able to access the recording later. And if you would like to ask a question, as Alex has said, if you put it in the question and answer section, so there's a chat for you to talk to each other, and there's a Q&A where we can take questions at the end of the session. We will do our best to take as many as we can. We can't guarantee, because we don't want to run over, so we can't guarantee time for everyone. But we're also giving presenter contact details, so you'll be able to contact any of us after the session. So now I'm very pleased to welcome Barbara Sandland. Barbara is a neurodivergent research fellow, pops up brilliantly, within the Autism Centre for Education and Research, having completed her master's with us and also her PhD. Barbara is going to explore what we mean when we refer to masking and share some recommendations from her work to reduce barriers experienced by autistic women. And I will hand over to you now, Barbara, and I will be switching my camera off and muting.
Thank you very much. And you just have to bear with us a second while we work out then how to transfer over to the presentation. So I'm hoping that I can make this work. I'm going to click share and then see whether I can make this go into a presentation. And hopefully, if that doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like, somebody's going to frantically wave at me. So on the basis that nobody is as of yet.
It isn't quite in presentation mode. Could you just, I think maybe if you might have to close it down and reshare to go from beginning. We can see the screen, but not in presentation mode.
Let's try again then, shall we? Let's give that a go. How does that look?
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to remember where I was now. So yes, so I'm Barbara Sandland. Let's start with that. That's who I am. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about masking, a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about masking, what do we know the impact of it is, and then a few recommendations. I'm going to draw on my research as much as I can from when I did my master's research and my doctoral thesis, but also a little bit as well from my own personal experience. Before I joined the University of Birmingham, I was a secondary school teacher. So I can draw on that a little bit as well. And I've got autistic children as well. So I draw on that a lot as well. So let's go forward. So when we're talking about, I'm using the word masking because that was the title I was given, but actually there's lots and lots of different words that may be used to be talking about the same sort of thing. Different people might feel like they refer to slightly different things, and it's probably too big a topic for me to delve into that today. It is until you do these sort of things you realise how much there is to say about it. So I'm already really going to talk fast, try and get it in 20 minutes. But so it's just important to be aware that these other words are out there and you may come across these as well. But in a nutshell, when we're talking about masking, we're talking about a change in the way we present ourselves in a social situation. 9 times out of 10 when masking relates to social interaction. And when we talk about autistic masking, there is a emphasis on trying to pass as normal, this magical concept of normal. So trying to potentially suppress the autistic characteristics, the autistic side, and pass more as a non-autistic individual. And that might be things like forcing eye contact or suppressing stims. It's amazing how many people put an awful lot of focus into not fidgeting and that sort of thing. And there are lots of strategies out there. I always get told that but you do make eye contact. And I said, no, what I've learned to do is I look here. And I don't know if you can see me or not. So if you can't, I'm pointing to like the eyebrow area. And that's where I look when I'm talking to somebody. So they think I'm making eye contact, but I'm not. So that's a form of masking because I'm trying to show them I am. Even though I don't want to. So there's lots and lots of things that go into sort of hiding those sort of elements because we're aware of what other people are going to say or how they're going to react, which is really ironic if you think about how we talk about autism. And quite often when people talk about autism, they go, oh, they're not interested in social interaction. They're not cued into how other people think and feel. I'm not sure masking matches that definition because actually we're hyper aware of what you're thinking and feeling, and that's why we're doing it. And that really feeds into the why do we mask. Masking wasn't the top focus when I did my doctorate research, but it was one of the things that people wanted to talk about. And the top 2 reasons that people said that they were masking was one was a safety mechanism due to fear of others, and 2, the second one was a conscious decision to try and fit in. And I mean, they're not distinctly different, are they, those things? They're really, I'm aware of what other people are saying, I'm aware of how people are judging me or what they're saying about me. Very, very high percentage of people were talked about bullying experiences. And all these things drive a desire to adapt and to hide in plain sight is a terminology I hear a lot of. And it impacts everybody. We're very much talking about women today, but this does impact all genders, I think, and all age groups. One of my participants spoke about recognising masking behaviours at 3. The top quote on there, I work really hard, mommy, so they don't see me struggle, was my 6-year-old at the time. So this is a really, it starts really early, and it has and can go on till really, really late. And I think what's really important as well, which I'm going to pick up on the bottom there, was that people said it didn't matter if they were diagnosed or not. Before you got diagnosed, people assumed it would matter. And I want to get the diagnosis because I want to validate, I want other people to accept. But actually people were saying that once they got the diagnosis, not a lot changed. They still masked, they still didn't quite get to where they wanted to be. So in the sense of, is masking a problem? I'm going to pick out the good, the bad and the ugly. I've tried to break it down a little bit and approach it, try and pick out on all the different bits. And I think it's really important that we talk about masking with an element of positivity as well. It's very easy to assume that masking is bad and that we need to stop it and that it's this really negative concept. And it's easy because there's lots of evidence, and I'll go on to that in a minute. But actually, there is a good element of masking. Masking is quite a normal human behaviour to a certain degree. Everybody masks. You go for a job interview and you meet the in-laws for the first time. There's always an element of presenting a persona that you think they want to see. And some people did pick out on the good things that masking did for them. Put a picture of a train on there because that was me sitting at the train station trying to make my way back from Luxembourg last week when the Heathrow closed. And I got on the train after a really, really traumatic start and thought I coped with that really well. And I don't know why. I was really stressed initially. Why? And I reflected that it was because I got somebody else with me. And my masking had kicked in so much that I couldn't show them that I was about to have a meltdown. And actually that got me through. And that I sat there and thought, actually, that was really helpful because that got me through that moment. I didn't fall apart. I kept going. And I think that's one of the important things about masking, I think, is that it can be good on a short term. It's a short-term strategy to manage a situation, to get something out of that situation that you want to get out of it. And the problem is when it goes past that short-term situation. And this is where we go into the lots and lots of evidence about the bad impact of masking. And it's because over time, I think our regulatory system, our emotions, we're not designed to maintain that mask, that the effort that goes into presenting that persona. And you can see there that the top 3 consequences of masking was emotional exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and physical exhaustion. So basically exhaustion. It is exhausting maintaining that thought process, that structure, that effort to constantly analyze what do other people want from me in this situation, and how can I adapt myself to be that person? Because everybody wants something slightly different. I mean, if we go back to the good things, I genuinely think that's made me a better employee, a better manager, because I am aware of what other people are thinking and feeling. Not necessarily good from the personal side of it, though. So there is this exhaustion that's going into it. And I've added the quote onto there from the Department of Education that says, if children do not feel understood, this can affect feelings of intimacy, trust and attachment later in life. Now that's a quote just from their early years child development guidance. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's so, so important, because if we're talking about children that are working out how to mask at 3, 4, 5, and what impact is that having later in life? And we know the evidence is there about the correlation between masking, camouflaging, and mental health, depression, stress, suicide. So we know it's there. We know this is important. So we know we need to do something about it. One of the other sides of masking is this idea of self. Milton Sims talks about an othered identity. So this idea that when you are marginalised, when you are ostracised, when you don't quite fit in, you become this othered person. And the othered person quite often is the person that then pretends to be something else in order to fit in. But the trouble with being this other person is you don't quite get to the point where you understand yourself and you embrace your own uniqueness. And that can have quite far-reaching consequences. So again, if I could like reflect back on my school days, and very much on my children that have gone through the secondary stages, when they start talking about career aspirations and career plans and future plans, all the conversations start with, what do you like? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? Which subjects do you like? All really focused on self-reflection. If we don't know, if we don't have a secure self, if we don't have the confidence to embrace a secure self, how do you do those sort of activities? So if you're asking a child, what do you enjoy doing? If they're telling you what they think you think they should enjoy doing, what impact's that having on their own career development, their own ability to move forward and plan and think about what they want to do? And it's also bad, not just for the autistic individual, but actually for the other people around them. And I think this was a really interesting part of my research that came out that I wasn't necessarily expecting to come out, was this idea that yes, we mask, yes, we know it's happening, and actually we recognise that that's impacting other people. Because if all non-autistic people are seeing is the masks that we present to them, they're never going to really understand what autism is. And it's quite a like duh sort of moment, but actually we don't think about that very often. So much thought and effort is going into portraying what we think they want us to say, but actually we're hindering their ability to accept and understand. It's quite an interesting sort of conflict. I can't think of the word was after there, but it's I think it's important to recognise that there's those two sides of that, and it impacts their ability to support us. So I was reflecting the other day that I come out of meetings with my children's Senkos, and so much effort has gone into me masking and presenting myself as the capable mother and the professional and the person that's going to fight, that by the time I come out of it, I forgot what they've said, or I haven't processed what they've said, because so much time and effort has gone into the concentration on the mask that I haven't got the space to process the other bits. But because I'm spending all my time focusing on that, they think I have. They've seen this professional, competent mother, so they're assuming everything's fine. And I can't now tell them it's not, because that would conflict. So I'm almost taking away their ability to offer me support by presenting them the mask and not being authentic with them. So it's really, really difficult to know what's the right thing to do and how to do it, but it's an interesting side to it. And then you get the ugly, which is what I've come to term the double masking problem, which is when you get stuck in that situation where in some situations I'm masking to pass as normal, and then at other times I'm masking to pass as autistic. So we have this singular concept of what normal is, but then we have this really weird singular concept of what autistic is. And we're constantly trying to strive for those singularities, and it's unattainable. It's just not something we can ever be. I can't ever be normal, and I can't ever be autistic. I am me and all the different parts of me. And I think that's the other really significant thing when we start talking about trying to look autistic. How many times we get told that, but you don't look autistic. Is the fact that yes, I am autistic, but I'm also dyslexic and I've also got ADHD. So my autism is going to look quite different to my husband's autism, who's just autistic. And I think quite often we don't think about the co-occurring difficulties and all the different things, the intersectionality, the fact that I'm female or that I'm a mother, all these different identities that come into it impact who we are, which means I can't be the same autistic person as the person next to me. but I'm going to mask and try and pretend to be because I think that's what you want me to be. And the trouble is, once you get stuck into that sort of double masking problem, it's almost doubly impactful. So then when you start thinking about the mental health implications, it's doubly as difficult. So a few recommendations as we go through. The first one may be potentially a little bit controversial, but for speaking to the autistic people in the audience, or if you know work with autistic people, is that there isn't a real autistic you underneath the mask. And I think this is one of the challenges when we use the word masking, is it implies that there is something covering the real you. And if we take it away, the real you is there. And I think that's challenging because sometimes we can kind of get stuck in well, how do I know what's the real me? I don't know what's the mask. I don't know what's not the mask. And I think that's really important because actually it's all you. Masking is a skill, and some of us are really skilled at it. But it's a skill that you've got as an individual. And let's not take that away. That's part of who I am. So there may be elements of me that I'd like to embrace more. There might be elements of me I'd like to explore more, or might like to be able to articulate and express more. But they're just parts. They're not the real thing and not the real thing. It's all me. It all makes me who I am. And I think that's really important to have that sort of positionality, because otherwise we get stuck into that finding that person, that trying to be that person of, oh, if the real autistic me is underneath, where are they? I've got to find them. How do I become that singularity? And part of this process of embracing and celebrating and allowing the different parts of us that we might be hiding come out more is about understanding. So much of the difficulties, I think, comes from the fact that we're never taught what it means to be autistic. We're never supported to understand what it means to be autistic. Even when you get a diagnosis, you're given a piece of paper and kicked out the door. Nobody is really helping us embrace that identity. What does it mean? What does it mean for us? How is it different? Why is it different? What are we good at? So much for time and focus is given to what we can't do. Nobody's really giving a huge amount of time to go, okay, well, what can you do? What are you good at? And I think there is a lot of internalized ableism. I shouldn't have to ask for help. I'm embarrassed that I have to ask for help. Why can't I cope with this noise? Everybody else can cope with this noise. Almost our own worst enemies, because it's so well embedded. So it's about being a bit kinder to ourselves, I guess. And I support some students going through university, and I always say to them, like, I can talk the talk, but I can't walk the walk. So I can say these things that I appreciate. They're really, really easy to say. They're not easy to do. It doesn't happen overnight. These are things that we've really got to work at and really, yeah, keep going. So if we position ourselves not necessarily as unmasking, but potentially living authentically, we're thinking about these really, really key things. And I'm going to try and speed up a little bit because I'm aware of time. But these are the things that I've written them. And as I say, I can write them and I know they're right. I don't necessarily live by them. But knowing what your autism means to you and accepting that it's going to be different to others. There is no one autism fits all. Your autism will be different to other people's, and that's okay. Accepting you will need support. And accepting that it's okay to use them. I think we all need support sometimes. I think we need to normalize that a little bit. Accept you'll have bad days, be self-compassionate. It's okay to have bad days. There will be days where it will just get too much, and we've got to allow that. Know that you are just as important as everyone else. That one makes me emotional saying it. And I think that's an important one. Recognize your strengths and celebrate them, getting that balance. Know that you're not just autistic. This is one of your ingredients that makes you who you are, but it's only one of them. and accept that there will be times that you will mask. Unmasking all the time is incredibly rare. It really is. Not many people do it all the time, so it's okay. And I just added on the top of there of stop shoulding, because I think that's really important. We do a lot of I should be able to do this, I should do this, I should do that. Should is a judgment, so we need to get rid of the should. Then in the sense of everybody, autistic or not, we need to connect with the autistic community because we learn so much from it. Both Sara and I's topics today are based on the fact that we is coming from the autistic community directly. So much of our knowledge comes from them. And it's so much that connection enables our understanding of ourselves and of each other. Too many of our children at school don't know that there are other autistic people out there, don't know what it means to be part of the autistic community. And that's really, really difficult. And we need to be really thinking about that, because the impact of realizing that you're not alone and that other people are experiencing things the same as you are is significant. So for the non-autistic people out there, and I'm going to education again, I'm coming back to, but we focus a lot on education in the terms of the lessons and the subjects, but children learn just as much from the playground as they do from the classroom. And so much is learned from how people interact with us and how we feel about school and how much of a trauma school is for a lot of our autistic people and what the impact of that is. So how do we really facilitate that environment where we are embracing the autistic identity and talking about it and exploring it and celebrating it, and just that saying, when teachers say they're fine when they're here, acknowledging that masking occurs and that they're not fine. And just because you think you can see somebody that looks fine doesn't mean they are. So last couple of slides then, again, for the non-autistic individual, you are not normal. I can officially say it. You're not. It just doesn't exist. We really need to accept that normal does not exist. And the only way that we can get to a position where people can live authentically is to recognize that you're not normal and celebrate it, and celebrate the fact that we're all not normal. I'm going to assume that most people know the double empathy problem by now, but it's just that idea that the autistic person is quite often told they do things wrong, but actually you may do too. Communication, for example, is a two-way street. You can't have a one-sided communication. So one person cannot have a communication deficit. If I'm struggling to communicate with you, that means you're struggling to communicate with me. If I can't understand what you're thinking and feeling, I can pretty much guarantee you can't understand what I'm thinking and feeling. So we need to really embed that into there. So it's all around providing that safety, enabling people to ask for help, accepting that we're different and going, it's okay. What should we talk about? Ask me. Can I ask you questions about it? Can we discuss it? I'm not going to assume you know what to do, so let's work it out together. Enabling safety is such a key thing. Loads and loads of references, loads and loads of things you can read. And that's me. I really need to stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. You covered such a lot of ground and a lot of food for thought. And, you know, I hope people don't mind that these sessions are quite quick. We are mindful that we are talking to a very busy audience. And so what we're trying to do is give you as much content as possible in a nice contained window of time. But there's lots of ways that you can find out more about this. And a reminder that Barbara is happy to answer questions at the end. And before we move on, just to say that Laura's very kindly posted some information on further support and other useful links into the chat now, in case that would be helpful. And if you're interested in joining our part-time online course, Autism in Adults yourself, then you can find a link in the chat too. And also, if you'd like to be added to our mailing list so that you can find out about future events, there's an email there as well. Okay, so moving on to our second presenter, Sara King. Sara, again, is an autistic doctoral researcher within our ACER Centre, having also completed her PGDip in autism in adults at the University of Birmingham here. And she's going to explore the autistic experience of maternity services and maternity staff experience of supporting autistic people. So that double perspective, although it's, as Sara will explain, a little bit more complicated than that. So I will hand straight over to you, Sara, and mute again. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'm just going to do the screen share shuffle. So bear with me while I also sort that out, and hopefully somebody can let me know if that's working effectively. Just one moment. No. Can I just check in with people? Can somebody let me know if you can see a slideshow?
No, could you try that again, please, Sara?
Yeah, okay.
Not coming up yet. We're having one of those Zoom days.
Right, 1 second. Apologies, I'm having just an issue here with this. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Andrea. I'll just give you a nod, shall I, when I need to change slides? Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so apologies about that. I'm Sara. I'm going to be talking about my research and also, as Barbara did, drawing on my personal experience as well as my as the research findings. So Barbara's presentation was absolutely highly relevant and really interesting, and I'd like you to be holding on to some of that of the things that Barbara shared, because it's really relevant in the information I'm going to be sharing too, and I'll touch on some of that as we go along. Next slide, please, Andrea. So the issues I'm going to talk about I'm going to cover today. Sorry, one back, please, Andrea. Sorry. It's moved on to, that's it. I'm going to cover the issues in relation to perinatal care. I'm going to talk about the aims of the research, the background and my experiences. I'm going to give some information about what maternity services staff and autistic mothers told me about their experiences and understanding. I'm going to then really move on to recommendations, and the purpose of today is to give you some considerations specifically for practice. So that's really what I want to focus on, and then some resources and signposting too. So next slide, please. So what are the issues and why is this important? Autism in girls and women has been significantly underexplored in research, and many autistic women have a late diagnosis or identification of being autistic. There may be different support in maternity services. So, for example, communication or infant feeding. Also the sensory experiences can be different and very impactful in a maternity situation. And there may also be co-occurring conditions which are highly relevant in the perinatal period. So things like ADHD, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, epilepsy, all those sorts of things can impact in a pregnancy situation and birth and need to be considered. We know about health barriers for autistic people already, and Barbara mentioned the double empathy theory, but we're also thinking about the triple empathy theory, in particular in relation to healthcare, which adds in the complexity of communication with healthcare professionals too. So there's an additional layer of that can also impact on the masking. Misunderstandings exist and stigma exist, despite autistic mothers demonstrating really positive parenting and bonding, and research evidence is that. There is a need for practical, specific support for autistic people when accessing services, and there's information and resources coming out now to provide that. And we've heard from Barbara about masking today, and I just want you to think about some of those things that Barbara raised, just in terms of the maternity situation. Health professionals might not realise if an autistic person is masking, and may not realise what support we need. And you can imagine, I think, what that might mean in terms of a maternity situation, and it could be very impactful. And somebody that may, Barbara described the processing that's happening while she's masking, and comes away in her experience sometimes not actually knowing what's been said and what's gone on, and that's really important in a maternity situation too. And there's potentially a compound impact to other family members if family members are also autistic, and that was impactful for me, and this ongoing impact potentially too. So my research aims were developed from my own experience as an autistic mum, and the challenges that I experienced. And I wanted to understand the context in terms of statistical information and policy. I wanted to learn about the experiences and knowledge that maternity services staff had. Barbara, Andrea, could you go back one, please? Thank you. I wanted to explore the experiences of autistic women and birthing people as users of maternity services, to then make recommendations for improvements. Next slide, please. Thank you. And that was designed then as a, I did some freedom of information requests to gather information. I did there's an online questionnaire from maternity services staff in England, and interviews, and then interviews from autistic women and birthing people too, it was a mixed methods heuristic inquiry, and we will share the link to a career talk I did in case anyone's interested in learning more about the research and about the heuristic inquiry approach particularly. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what did I find out? So from the maternity services staff, the staff really wish to provide excellent care, but there are some barriers to doing so. There was a strong drive to do that, but if you don't understand an autistic person's needs, and you have a different communication style, or different sensory needs, how can you be confident that you're understanding that and providing excellent care? There was a distinct lack of autism training generally. There was still stigma and lack of understanding, which was described in services generally. There are significant resourcing issues in maternity services, and there was information on BBC News today. The Quality Care Commission report from last September stated that not one of the 131 maternity units they inspected received the top rating of outstanding. 47% were rated as requires improvement, with 18% deemed inadequate. So there are general issues generally for maternity services. There's a real need for policy and guidance to support autistic maternity users, and a need for maternity-specific autism training too. And there are also autistic staff, and it's thinking about their needs too as well. Next slide, please. And these are the findings from interviews with autistic mothers. And I want to just talk through some of the themes and sub-themes from these particular interviews. There's a very small number of participants, just 8, so it's not generalizable, but it's insightful, and it did align with my findings from my previous study of 25 participants, and also other research, and also my own experience. So you can see on the left-hand side that analysing and engineering the process sub-theme. And this was, participants described systemic difficulties and really recognised some of the barriers that I mentioned earlier particularly. They were able to identify those very specifically, but also offer insightful solutions to these in a very thoughtful and considered, balanced way. So they identified the systematic problems and offered ways to fix those. Moving on to the motherhood is everything, but it's different for us sub-theme. This was a latent theme, and it identified, of course, that mothers had other commitments too, and other things happening in their life. But what I was trying to get to with that theme was the fact that it sort of fed into everything that they were sharing about. The well-being of their child or children was incredibly important. They were thoughtful and caring about parenthood, and the decisions that they made and the actions they took were to enable the best outcome for their child or children. And pregnancy, birth and early parenting were taken incredibly seriously, which often included extensive research and reflection. Coming on to one of the sub-themes underneath that motherhood is everything theme. One thing was, it's always been different for me. And that describes that the participants shared with me that they'd always felt or experienced the world differently, not just in the perinatal period. So some identified communication, experience and sensory needs throughout their lives. Many of them masked and described the impact of that and the impact of when they weren't able to in a maternity situation. They described challenges with transition and change, and differerences in processing need, history of mental health issues and misdiagnosis and co-occurring conditions. Just that theme really picked up that those experiences had always been the case. Moving on more to the perinatal and the maternity experience specifically, the what does push mean theme really describes and tries to bring out the difference and the difficulties in communication and information, those needs more specifically, and linking that back to the double empathy theory and the triple empathy we talked about a little bit earlier. Some things should just be good practice for all people, such as staff introducing themselves and their role. And this didn't always happen, and that was particularly impactful on communication and understanding for autistic participants. When information wasn't clear or accurate, it often led to stress, confusion, and anxiety. The next subtheme is that I'd be a tiger for other people. This was something that somebody shared that was actually a quote from a participant. And this, again, sort of fits with that idea that Barbara was sharing a little bit about people feeling as if they're perhaps not as important as everybody else. So it talked about how necessary it was to advocate because of lack of understanding. And that was through self-advocacy, but also through advocacy from partners or autistic health professionals particularly were advocating. Some participants found it challenging to advocate for themselves, although some did so, but they were absolutely willing to do it for other people. And that's where this I'd be a tiger came from. It was this idea that it might be hard to advocate for yourself if you don't feel perhaps you're as important as anyone else, which is the comment that Barbara made earlier, but would absolutely do that for other autistic people. And some participants joined and participated in the research to make sure other people had different experience than them. So some felt shame and self-blame for their needs and not wanting to be a problem, and that led to them not requesting support. And there was an emotional labour of repeatedly explaining their own needs, and self-advocating was exhausting. Autistic peer support was identified as particularly valuable. Some participants mentioned autistic midwives or those with personal understanding themselves, perhaps autistic family members. So that was really quite important in the communication. Moving on to the outcomes and ongoing impact. So this theme describes where needs weren't met, what the ongoing impact is, this really difficult experience, with one participant saying they were just off my head with just trauma. That was their quote. So there were significant risks when needs weren't met, including overwhelm, examples of autistic elopement with overwhelmed individuals just trying to escape the environment, risk of non-attendance of appointments, demand avoidance, or even consent issues if there wasn't sufficient processing time. So that led to ongoing trauma in some cases, some individuals having therapy for many months or even years afterwards. Others experienced experiences impacted on their mental health. And some people described lost milestones, which were impactful, which could then lead to a really difficult start to family life. Next slide, please, Andrea. Thank you. So just thinking about these findings as a whole, looking at the findings from autistic mothers and from from the health professionals and autistic and maternity staff, not autistic staff, some of them were. So from the maternity services staff and then from the autistic mothers, there was some agreement from both sides that there were significant issues affecting care, funding, resourcing, lack of understanding, those sorts of things. The staff that were involved in the research typically wanted to provide excellent care, but that contrasted with how autistic mothers had experienced and described their experiences, although there were some examples of really good care. Autistic staff and staff with autistic family members provided knowledge and expertise and demonstrated commitment to making improvements too, sort of having that autistic and autism community commitment to wanting to make those improvements. And there were some outcomes where autistic women didn't receive the care they needed, and that led to trauma, and there were significant risks. Next slide, please. I'm just aware of time. I want to really make sure that I move on to recommendations. So these recommendations are generally for maternity services and things that can be done to implement to improve services. So implement an autism policy and an autism pathway so that there's clear guidance there for staff. Ensure that all patient-facing staff have had comprehensive, specific autistic-led training. Specifically should include how to provide individualised care and considering communication, sensory, co-occurring conditions, but most importantly, a cultural shift and increased understanding in organisations. Consider having a specialist autism team. Sometimes this is happening informally in services with autistic staff or those with autistic family members or personal knowledge already providing advice to their colleagues. Ideally, it could be a trained team with providing that specialist support in the same way that mental health support is provided. Continuity and improved in-service communication. Some of the barriers that participants described with me was that information wasn't easily accessible and transferred across different parts of the service. So it meant that even when an autistic person had identified what their needs were and shared that information didn't follow them along through the pathway. And if they weren't in a position where they were able to explain what they needed, this can cause issues, particularly if somebody's actually in a period of stress and perhaps isn't able to communicate what their needs are or they have to just keep advocating for themselves. So making that communication in services easy to follow is really helpful. And also consider doing an environmental audit, particularly sensory audit, involving autistic people in sharing their recommendations for that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is recommendations for when you're actually supporting an autistic individual. So when supporting a person, some very simple changes in practice can make a wealth of difference. And in an ideal world, everyone should be supported in an individual way based on their needs anyway. But specifically for autistic people, make it easy and safe for people to share that they're autistic if they wish to. Sometimes in the forms that people have to fill in, the booking appointment, there's a question about disability, but you may need to have a question about neurodivergence instead, or about autism specifically. And some people may not feel comfortable to share that at all due to stigma or past experiences, or they may not know they're autistic. So think about how you can facilitate someone to safely stating what their needs are, regardless of how much they wish to share. And as I said, some of this might need a cultural shift. Make use of things like the booking appointment to give the right to ask the right questions in a safe space and give more time. In practice, that means that staff need to have more understanding to know how to do that and what they should be asking and what they could be offering. And in terms of reasonable adjustments, perhaps offer specific options and examples, because it's sometimes difficult if you're going into a new experience, particularly for someone that hasn't had a baby before. How do you know what you might need and if you don't know what's going to be happening? So it's really helpful perhaps to offer some suggestions and make that easy and accessible for people. Provide explanations and information and tailor that to the individual. Understand what somebody's needs are in terms of information and communication. Ask them and then tailor that information based on their needs. Provide follow-up information so that someone can process it later if they need to as well. Thinking about that masking and the processing that Barbara described, somebody might be sitting in an appointment appearing to actually be taking on board all the information that's happening, and they may not. So make sure that information is available in a different format or additionally afterwards. That did come up in my data. That was an experience that happened to participants, that they came away from appointments thinking, what just happened there? I don't know what happened there. So it's really important to make sure that information is available. Okay. Consider advocacy needs. Some people may wish to advocate for themselves and be comfortable doing so, although this may be variable in times of stress or when there's a lot to process or sensory overwhelm. So find out what's normal practice for somebody. In my data, there are examples of people who became unable to speak in specific situations and a partner spoke for them. This was usual for them in time. It was a strategy for them. And that's the same in my family situation. That is a strategy. When I become unable to speak, my husband will speak for me. It's really important to understand if that's the case for that individual and if it's a normal way of working, because this could be misunderstood. And I know staff do have training and look out for coercion and control, and these things can be misunderstood. So it's crucial to understand what a normal way of working is for a family, and particularly if someone does have a communication partner. Think about co-occurring conditions. There are some that can have high relevance. So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, epilepsy, ADHD, there are lots and lots of these. So if you're interested in finding out more, have a look at the Marge website, which I'll share shortly. Look out for that and learn about that, because they may be relevant if you're supporting an autistic person. The sensory experiences can be hugely impactful. There may be difference in pain presentation and experience of pain. There could be interoception differences where somebody feels things very differently, and these can be hypo or hyper, undersensitive or oversensitive in all senses, and that can be challenging for an autistic person, particularly in a maternity experience. So learn and understand what an individual may need and adjust accordingly. For example, ask for permission to touch or seek consent for that. Needs can vary at different times in the maternity journey. So for me, for example, pregnancy was amazing and went really well, and I felt really well. Postnatally was terrible, awful. Sensory overwhelm, physical impact, transition and change, all of those things were very impactful. For other autistic people, they may have a different experience to that, but that variability could be important to understand. It's another reason why continuity is so helpful, and that also provides a safe opportunity to discuss different needs at different times throughout the period. Don't make assumptions, check and ask, and listen and believe what people are telling you. Had experiences of women not being believed when they said they were in labour, when they were, and just not being heard. So that's really important. Next slide, please. Nearly done. I'd like to just share with you Marge. We are, as a result of meeting other autistic health professionals and autistic researchers while carrying out the research project, we set up a meeting and discussed what we could do to support other autistic people, and the outcome was Marge, the Maternity and Autism Research Group. So we're a collective of volunteers, we're multidisciplinary and cross-institutional, and we're all autistic or neurodivergent. Please do visit, have a look at this website, subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like to. We have new resources shortly to be added, and we also review and add research papers, so it's regularly updated. So please do revisit as we work and add things there. It's really exciting to be part of a collective supporting each other with the same aims and goals. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more information about what you can find on the Marge website. We have hospital passports, the Autistic Voice, research articles, lots and lots of resources. So do go and have a proper dig around. I'd like to particularly mention Dr. Amy Grant's Autistic Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond project, and we will share a link to that. Lots of the Marge members were involved in that. It's videos of autistic people talking about their experiences and health professionals talking about their experiences. So please, there's more than 100 videos there, so please do have a look at that. And we've got books on our website too, written by autistic people. Some of the Marge members have produced those resources and books and things too, so please do have a look. Next page, please. Just lots of references there for you to come back to if you'd like to, and then my contact details are on the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and you both kept time so beautifully. Which I think, considering the ground that you've both covered there, it's really amazing. And you know, I'm so proud of what our students achieve and the way that they change lives and change the understanding of autism and what is to be expected from research on autism. And those, I'm sure you'll agree, were really fantastic slides. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. There's one that's come up, which is a general one. So I'll just field this one quickly before we go on to questions for Sara and Barbara. So Lily's asked if the Autism Adults is useful for people working in the DE&I space, supporting employees rather than just adults in society generally. And the answer is very much yes. Because it's an adults course, we have people coming from all different sectors and walks of life. The focus is on autism, but also other neurodivergent conditions because the co-occurrence is so high between autism and other neurodivergent conditions. And then there are options to go outside of the field of autism and cover other specialisms as well. It's also eligible for student finance, and we accept vocational qualifications. But that's it for my pitch. I can see in the chat that I knew that you would get a lot from Barbara and Sara's presentations, and it's really heartening to see that. So the chat is full of words of appreciation, which we really thank you for, because it's a strange world doing a webinar where you can't see your audience. So now we will just look at some questions. There's one to start us off, and I will give this to whoever would like to answer it. But from your work so far, what has been the most important takeaway for you personally? Because you both talked about your work very much in relation to your positionality. So you started out with a passion for these areas, and then you've come a long way since then. So I don't know who would like to take that.
Kind of feel like I should, just to give Sara a break a minute while she's done all that amazing talking. Ask me the question again now.
Okay, so from your work so far, what's the most important thing that you have taken away, but for you personally? I guess the thing that's had the biggest impact on you, or the thing that you've decided, okay, I'm going to make a change based on this.
I think, well, there's loads and loads of things, to be fair. I think one of the key things for me is probably the journey. When I started, so my master's dissertation was on masking. I very much was on the masking is all about girls. It's all about autistic women. There's it's a gender specific thing. And then as time's gone on, and you kind of open yourself up to other opinions and other literature, and I think that's probably the biggest takeaways, is allowing yourself to open up and to hear what other people are saying, that you're thinking, and that kind of changes, and understanding develops, and it kind of gets you to the point, which is, I guess, the other side of it, is this idea of the mask isn't something you can put on and take away and put on and take away. It's not a separate entity. It is one and part of who we are as individuals.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you were talking about the double masking and the triple masking really resonated, that it's that whole identity is so complex, and it really, I thought, for those of us who are in the UK, that's particularly important, I think, now with the changes to benefits that we're looking at, and that fact that sometimes you're trying to prove that you aren't autistic, or kind of give the impression that you're not, and sometimes you're trying to demonstrate that you are autistic, and having to kind of shift these masks. And like you say, you know, what that depends on is having some control over, isn't it? Which is that's the big if there, I think.
It's a really weird shift in perspective where sometimes you're like, I must make eye contact, I must make eye contact. And then other times you're like, I mustn't make eye contact, I mustn't make eye contact. And it's just that constant thought process of what does the other person want from this situation, rather than a thought process of what do I want from this situation. And I think we lose the what do I want. And I think that's quite fundamental.
And I think the other thing that really resonated with your talk and Sarah's is that so often when autistic women are going into maternity services, they're not diagnosed yet. They're not going to be diagnosed until a few years later when the children are diagnosed. But I know we're running out of time, and Sarah really wanted to answer a question that's come up in the chat, which is, do we know why maternity services aren't accessing Oliver McGowan or equivalent mandatory training on autism? Sarah, can I hand that over to you?
Yes, please. And I'm really pleased that's been asked, because I didn't explain that my research was for that section was carried out before the Oliver McGowan training was rolled out. So it is true now that maternity services staff will have access to the Oliver McGowan training, and I know that's happening and it's really valuable. What they are specifically saying, though, in the research to me, and it's a continual point that comes up, is that actually there are some very particular issues relating to maternity services that need a more detailed and very focused, specific training course to cover the particular issues that are relating to maternity. So thank you for asking that question, and I'm really sorry that I didn't explain that in the first place. I've been doing the PhD over 6 years, so things have changed massively since I started, so it's really important to pick up on those sorts of changes. The field has changed quite significantly in that time.
Yeah.
Have I got a second just to answer the other question, which I know we have to finish?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so just in response to your question, Andrea, about the question that you asked Barbara, for me, the most important, it's been really helpful to have my experiences validated. I didn't know I was autistic at the time that I had my children, but more importantly, to know I'm not the only one person who cares deeply about this topic and feels compelled to make change for others. I know the Marge members are really, really keen to make change and make difference. There are other people in services, other autistic people, other people in the autism community that are really keen to make change too. And actually to be able to see that working and making change and happening is really, really powerful. And so that's what I've got most from this experience. So thanks for giving me the chance to say that.
Thank you. That's a really positive and hopeful ending, which I appreciate. We have gone over. I do apologise that the slides had a complete life of their own in this session. We're going to email you out the things that we put in the chat and useful links and things. And when the recording is available, we'll let you have that as well. Thank you to Alex and Laura for your help this evening. And most of all, thank you to Barbara and Sarah. I think this is such important work that you're doing, and it's just brilliant to be able to share it. So I hope that everybody has found that useful and interesting. And thank you very much for making the time to attend, and have a good evening.